Welcome back, Master Reference Journal creators and Master Reference Journal altered book style creators. Today we're going to talk about the only thing we didn't talk about during the paper dyeing episode, and that is coffee and tea dyeing.
Let's talk about faux foxing. This, I hope you can see this. This browning here and here, that's called foxing on paper. And when you tea dye or you coffee dye, that's the aging that you're trying to achieve. Foxing comes from the paper interacting with the environment and beginning to deteriorate. So this is 1-year-old tea dyed paper, and I got varying levels of intensity. Tea dyeing tends to be a little redder than coffee dyeing, and it depends on the strength of the tea, because it's the tannins in the tea that are going to be the color that shows up. The problem with that is tannins in organic matter, plants, trees, whatever, tannins are acidic. And in the aquarium hobby and in the aquarium industry, you would add botanicals. You would add leaves and seed pods and that kind of thing to slightly acidify your water. Some people keep fish tanks that are what we call black water tanks, in that the water looks like tea, and it's a good environment for some fish and some other aquatic life. Tannins in the water for those aquatic species might not be attractive to us, but it's what they need. They need that slightly higher acidity to survive. It's the environment they're used to. I did an episode about a year ago on why I don't tea dye or coffee dye ever. And the reason is the acid in coffee and tea deteriorates your papers. I've heard other creators tell about creators they've heard report that they come back to a journal they made a year or two ago and all of their ink is deteriorated or gone. Elements are turning brittle, some of them. That's a result of acid in the dye, whether it's coffee or tea. So we're going to talk about how to neutralize that acid.
And I want to stress, this is not a recipe, it's a guide, because you're going to have to neutralize the acid in the coffee with baking soda by eye. To make a controlled test, I used 3 single-serve instant coffee packets. I poured those into a half-cup boiling water, and I stirred to dissolve the coffee. Then I added 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and it'll foam up. So you want to allow it to cool until the foam breaks and it's lukewarm. Then you add 1 cup of rubbing alcohol if using it as a spray dye, as I did. On the left, on the bottom of that test strip, is the full strength neutralized coffee. In the middle is it diluted with the 1 cup of alcohol. And on the right is children's marker and alcohol, just like we did for our dyeing episode, except for that has 3 brown and 1 black. Up above, I took out a test strip from my aquarium stuff. Yes, I have an aquarium, but I had test strips. And as you can see, the full strength coffee dyed the test strip, which I knew would happen. So you can't really use those test strips as acid tests. If you can get your hands on some litmus paper, you'd have to order it from a chemical company. You might be able to test it for acid, but your coffee's going to stain the paper.
So what kind of results did we get? Yes, I dyed the manila folder because why not? So this is coffee dye, and some of you already know that my method of dyeing papers is a little bit different than other people's. Most of the time you see people putting their papers in a pan of dye and submerging them. I don't do that. I have a cookie sheet, I wet the cookie sheet, and I then spray the dye on top, flip it over, spray it. You can look at the dyeing episode for my method. So this is coffee dye, and I got varying results. I like this one a lot, but as you can see, the back is not as saturated, and that's just a function of the method I use. And I like doing it that way because if one paper is too dark, and I'm not saying either one of these are, but if one paper is too dark, I have a lighter side usually that I can use. So coffee dye, more coffee dye. I like this one a lot, but you can see this is a little bit lighter. And these are just papers to separate coffee dye from the ink that I use. This is the children's markers, 3 brown, 1 black. And I have to tell you, I was really excited when I saw the dye come out. It came out this deep, dusty olive green, and I was just thrilled. But unfortunately, that's not the color I got. I got brown. I'm not unhappy about it because that was the experiment we were doing, is dyeing for a coffee or coffee-like color. So here's my dye, and you can see it's lighter on the back. I like both the dark side and the light side. And here's where I double dyed. I have some more of my own marker dye still drying because I wanted to show you that you can get a darker, intense color. You don't have to use coffee. So here's where I double dyed. This on the outside is the coffee dye, and there was a piece of paper on top, so it made a resist. So I put it in my dye as well, and I got some deepening of color. I got, some on the white, but because it didn't absorb much dye in the first place, this is, it doesn't appear to be a good result. I love this result. I'll probably use this side as a border template. Now there's a couple other ones that I want to show you, but before I do, I just want to show you side by side. So here's mine and here's coffee dye. Is this paper going to last? Did I neutralize the acid? Did I use enough baking soda to make this paper last? There's no way to know unless, I don't know, you go through some expensive, testing and whatnot, and I'm not willing to do that. I do want my papers to last, but I'm not willing to jump through crazy hoops to do it when I can get a perfectly acceptable print with children's markers and rubbing alcohol. Let's compare our coffee, our children's markers, and tea dyeing. See how red the tea is? It's up to you.
Of all the dyeing I did for this episode, I love this one the most. It has a wonderful hand feel. It's not like the crinkly, crackly dyed papers everybody likes. This is more the feel of a paper bag. And I'm going to show you a detail so you can see why I love it so much. It's got very fine wrinkles that have absorbed just tiny bits of dye to give it a very subtle wrinkled effect. I just love this piece, and I'm going to scan it, and hopefully I can print it out and the detail will be preserved. These last two are examples of letting your paper sit in a shallow pan of dye. Now, by shallow, I don't mean submerging it. I mean getting it wet on both sides and then just letting it sit there. This is my faux alcohol ink dye, and I just let it sit there and air dry, and it absorbed more and more of the dye from the children's markers. The other one is craft paper. It did not absorb as much that we can see with our naked eye, but you do see that the edge is much, much darker, not unlike the doily. There are products out there that are called archival sprays. They will neutralize your paper and keep it from deteriorating as quickly. One of them is called Bookkeeper, and it's very expensive, $50 a can for something normal aerosol can size. Alternatively, I have found this product at Dick Blick. It comes in gloss and matte finish. I cannot guarantee that it will neutralize the acid in your paper, but it will give it some UV protection, and it will slow down anything that would permeate the surface of your raw coffee dyed or tea dyed papers. Or you could just use the DIY alcohol ink spray and not worry about it. As Tim Holtz has pointed out himself, the main difference between a DIY spray and one of his line of alcohol ink sprays is that his sprays have resin in them, and resin is a fixative and protects the paper. Next week, we're going to talk about tools and big purchases. And by tools, I mean things like, do I need a cutting mat? Do I need a paper trimmer or a scoreboard? What about a die cutting machine or a die cutting combination with embossing? And there's pros and cons to that. Back when junk journals first came out, they didn't have anything other than reused junk material, reused window envelopes, reused note paper, the back of business letters. It was truly junk. Now, 20 years later, give or take, it's become big business. There's another question up on the screen. What is the hashtag Alpacamade on Amazon? That is a variation on the hashtag founded on Amazon. So what it is a list of materials that I purchased on Amazon because I couldn't find it at the dollar store. Some of those things, like the black cardstock and a ream of paper and silicone glue by Beacon, some of those things you can't get at the dollar store. Now, if you bought everything that so far, up to this day, if you bought everything that we've used and you bought it retail or you bought it on Amazon, you've spent about $75 over the last 2.5 months, I think. Yeah. If you only bought at the dollar store, you have only spent about $50 in 2.5 months. Going forward, if you are really into junk journaling, maybe some bigger purchases are appropriate. And we'll talk about that next week. That's all I have for you for this week. Thank you so much for joining me as always. A shout out to the new subscribers and the visitors. We really appreciate you. And God bless you. Take care of yourself. I'll see you real soon.